Okay, we're just going to wait another minute or so to see if we have more folks coming in.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth session of Academic Resilience. We're so excited to have you all back this morning and really excited for our guest speaker today. During the session, we're actually going to ask you if you can turn on your cameras. We're going to be doing a few activities where you'll need to we'll want to see you. So I welcome you to do that if you are able to do so. All right, so we're going to begin. All right, so our guest speaker today is Dr. Mary Yi, who is a first-generation low-income student before the term was coined. She is an educational researcher and community activist who grew up in Boston, Chinatown as a child of first-generation working-class Chinese immigrant parents. In Philadelphia, Dr. Mary Yi has also worked extensively with immigrant and refugee communities for over 35 years. Mary is a founder of Asian Americans United, AAU, an organizing and advocacy organization. As the Director of Family Engagement and Language Equity Services within the School District of Philadelphia, she partnered with community-based organizations across the city to engage families in their children's education. Dr. Yi holds I think it's supposed to be BA, correct? A BA degree. Oh, no. Sorry. Holds a degree.
Called AB there.
AB, fine. Dr. Yi holds an AB degree at Princeton University, 2 master's degrees from Penn, and an ED from Penn Graduate School of Education. She now researches educational issues in immigrant communities, communities of youth and youth activism, university community partnerships, and the interrelationship between health, educational disparities, as well as the experiences of grassroots community members in their struggles for social justice. So we'll have a warm welcome for Dr. Mary Yi.
Thanks a lot, Jazzy. I'm really psyched to be here today and to be part of the SAILS program, which I think is just terrific. And I'm so excited to be here and to speak at a college whose vision basically is to teach social justice and have people go out in the world and make it a peaceful and just place. So first of all, I'm going to ask us to do an interactive activity. So if you would go to grid view, then we'll get started. So I'm going to do an activity that some of you already probably are familiar with, and when we do it in person, it's called stepping in and out of the circle. So, you know, someone will read a statement, and then if it applies to you, you step into the circle. If it doesn't, or you step out. So instead of doing that, we're going to raise our hands. So I'm going to read a statement, and if it applies to you, please raise your hand, okay? And then look around at your classmates. So this is an activity that helps us get to know each other so that we can build a community of practice. You know, so that way that when you work together, you'll know something about each other and what commonalities you have, as well as some of the differences that you can learn from each other. So this first activity really has to do with being first generation low income. Okay, and if you don't feel comfortable doing this, raising your hand for this, that's fine. But please think about that, because that will help you to get to know each other. So please put on your video. Okay, so this is the first question. I'm excited and a little anxious starting college at St. Mary's. If anyone feels that way, okay, look around, see who your classmates are. Okay, then put your hand down. College life is totally new to me. Hands up. Okay, hands down. I had a pre-college experience that helped me understand what college was going to be like. Anyone? Okay, a few people. Great. I had help outside of my family for filing my college application, writing my essays, or completing my financial aid form. Did anybody have help? Okay, good number. Okay, but not everybody. I had to do most of my application financial aid form myself. Okay, that was me too. I feel family pressure to succeed in college and get a good job. Yeah, that's all of us basically, right? I feel, I feel college will offer me a way to escape from my neighborhood or family. Yeah, that's the reason why we go to college a lot of times, right? Because we want to, yeah, we have a lot of trauma in our families, a lot of difficulties, and if we could get away, we feel like we could basically straighten out and also go forward. Since I'm going to college, my family and old friends act differently towards me. Yeah, sometimes it creates a wedge between you and, in a sense, your old life. And that's something that happens, and a lot of times we try to make bridges there, but just kind of understand that that happens because you're having different experiences, you're learning new things, and a lot of your attitudes might change, but those of your family and friends might not change so fast. Okay, I speak a language other than English with my family or friends. Okay, so a lot of us are also from immigrant families. I'm hopeful that college will lead me to a bright future. Yes, that's right. Okay, thanks a lot. So that's our opening activity. And then now I'm going to talk about my family history and social justice. So I feel that each of us can relate what has happened in our own families to, say, world events and national events. And a lot of those are events that propel our families to make the choices that they do, or propel us to make the choices that we make, okay? I don't know if any of you are DACA students, but anyhow, that's like one immediate prime example right there, right? Okay, so I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so my PowerPoint is entitled Our Family Histories and Social Justice. So today is August 6th, 2020. It's the 75th anniversary of a world-changing event. Does anybody know what anniversary this might be? Okay, it's the anniversary, oops here, uh-oh, what's going on?
I think if you just
okay,
press, that happens to me sometimes, just, yeah, press there. Sometimes I just have to move my cursor to the middle of the screen, and then it allows me to keep moving forward.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, so today's the anniversary of the US bombing of Hiroshima, okay, towards the end of World War II. So this was the bombing of an important Japanese city. And what this reminds us of is the racism and xenophobia that has been underlying US history since its beginning, really. Okay, so during World War II, you know, you might think about, well, why was it that Japan was bombed, not Germany or Italy? You know, and then why was it only the Japanese Americans that were sent to prison camps? You know, why weren't the Germans and Italians rounded up en masse? A few of them did go to prison camps, but all the Japanese that were west of the Rockies went to prison camps. So, oops, sorry. So my own family, not my nuclear family, but my husband's family experienced the camps. And you also find that Jazzy's family had people that also were in the camps. So in December 41, Pearl Harbor happened, and then FDR, President Roosevelt, signed an executive order called 9066 that said that all the Japanese Americans that were west of the Rockies were to be put into these camps. And people were only given a couple weeks to move, and they could only take with them what they could carry. That meant that a lot of people lost their homes and businesses because they could only sell them for a pittance. Okay, so here were thousands of people going to these camps, not knowing what their future would hold, and losing everything that they had made basically as their lives on the West Coast. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so Paul is my husband, and Paul's family was interned in Rower, which is one of the camps in Arkansas. And you can see on the left a kind of aerial view of the barracks. But what this does not show you is the barbed wire fences around this property, as well as the watchtowers. If you've seen any of the Nazi watchtowers, those are the same kind of watchtowers that were used at all of the prison camps. There were armed guards everywhere. In the watchtowers, the guns were turned inwards. Soldiers with guns patrolled the camps. The camps, I mean, they may not look that bad right here, but they were all in very desolate areas where the weather was bad. There were dust storms. It was really cold in the winter. Some areas, it was swampy. So these were hours and hours away from any large city, and people were made to grow their own vegetables and basically, you know, start from scratch here too, making a life. And the barracks had very small places for families. You know, maybe there would be a whole extended family, grandparents and everybody in maybe a 20 by 20 room. So on the right-hand side, you see my mother-in-law's family, and she's the perky young woman that's in the middle in the front row. So because of her experiences and because of basically her natural inclination to basically work for social justice, she was a social worker. She became the head lobbyist for what was called the Redress and Civil Liberties Act of 1988. So with a lot of hard work in the political realm, she was able to get legislators to pass a bill that President Reagan signed. So this was momentous because, first of all, it was an apology to the Japanese American community for the injustices during World War II. It also provided for $20,000 for each survivor that was still alive at the time the bill was signed. And moreover, it was an admission that the government had been racist and had been vulnerable to war hysteria, and failure of political leadership. So here she is getting an award, one of many. And those of you on the left that know the Beatles might recognize that's actually Yoko Ono. Okay, so I'm going to leave there and go to my own family history. I was born in a small town in New England, in Rutland, Vermont, and my parents basically with my uncle owned this restaurant that's at the lower right. I'm not sure if it's turned around on your screen, but there's a place with a red awning. And so I grew up there. And well, you know, a lot of you know what it means to be sin papeles, without papers. So actually my family was not without papers. We had false papers. We had papers, like I said, but they were false. So what happened? So in the 1800s, there was famine in China. So a lot of menfolk went abroad to Southeast Asia and America, Australia, to work and send remittances back home. And this certainly sounds familiar for a lot of you that are Latinx folks, right? So this happened for generations, and it happened for generations for a couple of reasons. One was because there was the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which meant that except for the Chinese that were already here at the time, no more Chinese could come, only people that were here and their families. So that's what set up this whole system of false documents. So my father's last name, when he came over, was the same as mine, Y-E-E-E. But his real name was G-E-E, okay? And so because of the family structure under those papers, I had a paper brother who you see that in the middle. I only met him once in my life, okay? And so this basically went on, and just as it was today, it was kind of like an open secret in our own community, but it was a secret to all outsiders. We couldn't say, you know, who our real sisters and brothers were, because I had two real sisters that were in China at the time. And so what happened too was because of racism in terms of employment. Um, in the late 1800s, Samuel Gompers, who started the AFL-CIO, declared that Asians could not be assimilated, that they were immoral, they were barbaric, and therefore they could not be part of the unions. So from that time on, especially, Asians were in ethnically tracked work. So you might have heard how they were in restaurants, in laundries, and in landscaping. Okay, and that might sound familiar today too, to communities who have come over recently. So my family story was the typical sojourner family, people coming over, sending back remittances, and then the next generation coming over, doing the same thing until my father's generation, because that was right at the time of World War II. So since he was a veteran, he was able to bring my mother over. So it was the first time that a family in our, extended family was able to come over. So when I was about 8, we moved from all white Rutland, Vermont to Boston, Chinatown. So that was a real change for me. And we lived on the left-hand side in these tenement apartments that had very little heat, no bathtub, lots of rats and cockroaches. And then on the right-hand side, I went to the school that was built in 1848, and it was still in use, over 100 years old when I went to it. And had no auditorium, no lunchroom, and the toilets, you might have seen these kind of toilets in some kind of historical building where there is like a tank on top and you have to pull a chain and then the water comes down and flushes into the bowl. Those were the toilets we had. And then the men and boys bathroom was a trough of running water. So I lived in and went in a segregated neighborhood, and I went to a segregated school. I think maybe 5% of my elementary school was not Chinese, and it was Lebanese, because the Lebanese had lived in that area of Boston before we got there. Okay, so after that, I went on to college. I was lucky to go to a magnet school and get into a good college, but really I was not aware of my own history. But when I went to college, what I did was try to figure out my own roots. At that time, there was no ethnic studies in college, so I majored in East Asian studies. So I learned about the history of China, not the history of Asian Americans, right? But anyhow, it was a beginning. And then in 1970, President Nixon bombed Cambodia. And that was kind of the last straw for the anti-war movement, who had been pushing for a pullout for a long time because so many GIs had died and we weren't really winning. And so all over the country, universities went on strike. So at Princeton, there weren't that many Asian students at the time, really different from, schools now. And so we managed to come together, and we all felt, that we were against the war and wanted to support our brothers and sisters in Vietnam. So we bought this whole page ad and talked about how we were against the war and against the extraction of resources and the racism and so on. So the Black students really were our political leaders at the time, at least for those students of color. And they were saying, well, we're against the war, but what we're going to do is really focus on going back to our own communities and making sure that we fight for social justice there, for better housing, healthcare, education, and so on. So I heeded that call, and then I ended up in Philadelphia because I went to grad school in Philadelphia. And on the left, you see a picture of me and a small group of activists that formed this organization called Yellow Seeds. And the important thing that we did was that we joined the fight and also led the fight in many ways to save Philadelphia Chinatown from a highway that was going to basically destroy all of it. So that's where I cut my teeth on community organizing, because I learned how to basically write newsletters, how to leaflet, how to talk to people, how to try to convince people, of a certain point of view, and also how to deal with agency officials and the news media. So here, what has happened is that when there was an unauthorized demolition of houses, we went and stopped the bulldozers. We walked right in front of the bulldozers and made them stop. And we stayed up there and we wouldn't come down until some of our demands were met. So I'm over there on the left behind the banner, And then behind me is one of the newscasters who came up and put us on the evening news. So that really helped our campaign a lot. So after that, I went into the labor movement. I was a garment worker for a couple of years and worked in a men's suit factory in Philadelphia. And the reason why I did that is because a lot of us who were activists felt, well, we were doing a lot of community work, but we weren't doing that much with workers. So we went into different industries, and I went into the garment industry and worked in a rank and file caucus because the unions, for the most part in the US, had become what we call economic unions, and were not really political. They weren't trying to, fight for social justice. They were only trying to fight for higher wages, mainly. And a lot of times they were in collaboration with the company owners. But what happened was we didn't really do a good analysis, because within a few years, most of the shops had moved south or had gone abroad. So that kind of curtailed that organizing in the labor movement. A little bit after that was when the Southeast Asian refugees started to come to Philadelphia. And they were placed a lot of times, almost always actually, in Black communities that were really under-resourced already, right? And they were placed in these abandoned apartment buildings. And so a lot of times the roof was leaking, there was no heat. But anyhow, the resettlement agencies put them there. And so we organized there so that they could get basically standard housing. So this became a Section 8 apartment building later on. And by the way, this is where I met my husband. I kind of got into educational organizing in a roundabout way. There was a lawsuit in Philadelphia on behalf of the Southeast Asian immigrants, because when they went to school, at that time, there were no ESL programs, no special ed for ESOL, no bilingual counselors, and so on. So I was on an advisory committee. And then after that, I was hired to be an administrator in the district, because the district kept being hauled into court for not complying with a court order. So I stayed at the district for about 12 years, and I worked mainly in the ESL bilingual program office, but then later on became director of family engagement and language access. So because of actually my political beliefs and my connections with communities, I was pretty much ousted because I was a threat to the administration. My office too was really multicultural and multilingual, and everybody loved it, and it was a model for other offices, but there was a lot of resistance to it too. So in a way, it was a good thing that I was laid off, and after another job or so, I ended up going to the doctoral program at the University of Pennsylvania. And that's where I met Dr. Rusoha. And we bonded together because of our common experiences working in immigrant communities and also dealing with language access problems. Let's see here. So my work in my doctoral program focused on researching immigrant youth activism. So in Philadelphia, there had been a really horrendous incident of interracial violence at a comprehensive neighborhood high school. This was between Chinese and Vietnamese ESL students who'd only been around for about 2.5 years, and African American students. Now this school had a lot of problems already because in 6 years they had 5 principals. So you can imagine how disruptive that was. Well, what happened was one day after school, there was this huge assault on about 17 or 19 Asian students who ended up going to the emergency room. The school district basically refused to say anything about this until the students went to the news media. Okay. And when they went to the news media, the district said, well, this is gang violence, or, this is not a racial incident. Okay. And so the students, well, even though the people that assaulted them were African Americans and their fellow students, After a lot of thinking about it and analyzing, they said, well, you know, that's the case, that they did hurt us, but it's not their fault that we had this incident. It's really the fault of the school administrators. So they really fingered the school administrators as being the ones that were responsible for having safe schools for everyone. And thus they avoided being baited into a racial situation that would pit Asians against Blacks. So with the help of veteran Asian American community organizers, the students staged a 9-day strike and wouldn't go back until the administration guaranteed or tried to guarantee different measures for safety in the schools. So a lot of this had to do with also serious incidents reports, which the school police, who didn't speak any language but English, would take and would only listen to, say, students that spoke English, which was for the most part not the ESL students. And also, they didn't provide any support for students who wanted to report things in the first language. And there was hardly ever any resolution of these incidents. There was no effort on the part of the school district and any of the schools to try to have students from different backgrounds understand each other. And so many of you who have, you know, been in different high schools know how the ESL population is segregated from the special ed population, from the general population, there's tracking and so on. So this was true at this school as well. So the community mobilized and went to the school district and staged a lot of public protests. And one of the things that was really great is that with different connections, the students built coalitions across the city, especially with the folks on the right, the Philadelphia Student Union, which was a multiracial, multi-ethnic formation that was very progressive. So they were able to actually institute change in the school district because the Department of Justice mandated it. So I forgot to say that the students filed a civil rights complaint against the school district with the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice found that the school district basically had been racist and negligent and not providing for a safe school. So that was a big slap in the face for the district. And so the school in particular had to change the way it operated. And they brought in a new principal to that. And that was pretty okay. And there was a monitoring by the Department of Justice, and there were certain measures to try to get the students to get to know each other. Not always that great. And also professional development, as always, but not sustained professional development for the staff. On the district level, there were different policies that were enacted by the board that were helpful. And this DOJ ruling, Department of Justice ruling, was also a model for another district in Minnesota that later on had incidents that related more, though, for LGBTQI students. So I want to turn now to say something that is affecting all of us currently. That is COVID-19 and the pandemic. So before I ask you all to actually get into small groups, I'm going to do the same activity that I did earlier with you. Okay, the hands up, hands down activity. So I'm going to ask you again to go to grid view and to raise your hands if these statements apply to you. There's been a lot of talk in the news about the pandemic and how there have been disproportionate impacts on communities of color. And so I think it's been important for us to talk about this in a lot of our gatherings. So in a lot of the meetings that I've been in, we always start off with checking in and people kind of talking about what's happening with their families and friends around COVID-19. So, okay, so the first statement I'm going to read is, I have family or friends who have been affected by COVID-19. One or more of the infected people I know were essential workers. That is, they were medical people, worked in grocery stores, delivery, sanitation workers, and so on. Okay, next. People in my circle are trying hard to prevent from getting infected. Are people trying hard to prevent, okay, the spread? I see a lot of people who are not wearing masks or keeping social distance. Okay, almost everybody there too. I feel my future health and that of my family is at risk. Okay, so some of you have grandparents, you know, or people that have chronic underlying conditions. Yeah, those folks are at risk. Okay, so let's see. I'm just going to share my screen one more time here. So in the Asian American community, there's been a lot of talk about anti-Asian hate incidents that have arisen since COVID-19. So maybe some of you got to listen to the news clip that I had asked Jazzy and Dr. Rousseau to share with you. And I guess I want to preface this by saying that one thing that we don't have time to talk about today is the Asian American community is very diverse income-wise and ethnicity-wise. And so the socioeconomic status of different segments of our community are really different. You have really high income professionals who live in suburban communities, usually in white communities. And then you have folks that are living in really substandard housing, you know, in low income communities that are struggling because they're unemployed, they may be undocumented, and they came as refugees or as economic immigrants, okay? But so what's happened recently is the Asian Americans in general have been more aware of anti-Asian racism because they have been victims of it. And in the past, this maybe had not occurred so much because Asians sometimes are seen as the wedge between blacks and whites, right? I mean, because there's a lot of binary stuff that goes on around racialization. So folks who are pretty middle class, you know, oftentimes did not really experience that much racism. They didn't go to schools where, you know, like people bullied them or called them names and so on. Okay, so with COVID-19, people started to wake up and to understand that, you know, as Asian Americans who look different, you know, might speak different languages, okay, people were seeing them and targeting them. Okay, so we have some questions here that we would like you to talk about in small groups. And I'm going to let Jazzy now organize you folks and also give you the questions.
Perfect. So I have sent those questions in the chat. There are 3 of them. I'm going to put you all into small groups. And if you could, in your small groups, assign someone or ask someone to be the reporter to share back with us. We'll be asking you to come back after, I think, 12 minutes and share out what you all discussed in your small groups. And if you would like to share that responsibility with multiple people, like, please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear multiple voices. So I'm going to open those rooms now, and we'll see you all back here soon.
Great.
Hi, y'all. Welcome back. We're just waiting for a few more groups to finish up. We're going to start. I'll explain when they all get back.
Hi, everyone. So I think Jesse's gonna walk us through sharing, but I think yesterday what we did is we had the different mentors share, and I think we could do that unless people remember the rooms that they were in, the numbers. I don't remember. Diego, do you remember what number we were in? I don't remember.
Professor Rusoha, I'll actually, I'll say, because I have the breakout rooms pulled up, and so
Awesome, I love it. So how about you do that?
Perfect.
Excellent.
Okay, cool.
And do we have Mary? I think we may have, no, there she is. I thought.
Yeah, she's here. Okay, awesome. So each group will have about a minute to share. I know it's not a lot of time, but we are on a crunch time. So the first breakout room was the breakout room with the peer mentor, Chris. So if you would like to share, we would love to hear what you have to say. And it doesn't have to be Chris, it could be whoever was in that breakout room.
Is this for like the whole, like broad, like all three questions at once?
Whichever question you want to touch on.
All right, so I'll touch base a little bit, but for the first question, we were talking more so like how stereotypes of Asians can be like they're smarter than people, and that puts like a lot of pressure on them, like on like in society to like succeed or quote unquote like be like seek higher education than like other racial groups. And in terms of like features, like the people like they'll discriminate against their eyelids and that stuff, and especially right now with COVID, people calling it the Wuhan virus, China virus, it really just brings them down, like morally, like it takes people down a notch, and that's not really a good thing.
That was exactly a minute, Josiah. That was amazing.
All right, awesome. The next group is with peer mentor Arturo. So whoever was in that group.
Yeah, so we noticed a very similar thing, especially like in light of recent situations. Asian people, specifically like Chinese people, have been blamed for like the virus and its spreading and stuff. We also noticed that in comparison to the Black Lives Matter movement, we haven't seen many Asian American protests, very few, at least on social media and stuff.
Thank you, Alex. Breakout room 3 with peer mentors Alondra and Ashley.
Yeah, this is for number 2. What we said was if there was no real like systematic racism and like if there wasn't as many protests and stuff, I think there wouldn't be as big of a second wave of COVID as there was, because people are protesting and for a good cause and stuff. They aren't really thinking about the concerns of COVID-19 and how it'll spread through that. Yeah.
Thank you. Next group is breakout room 4 with Dr. Rusoha and peer mentor Diego. So either Cecilia or
Daniela and Cecilia, we're all gonna take turns. So maybe let's start with Daniela and then we'll go with Cecilia.
Perfect.
Okay, so we basically touched upon the idea of like the stereotype of Asians, like having like the idea that they're like dirty and that they eat like dirty things and that they're not clean. Also the idea that that all Asians were like sick with the virus, and just like touching upon what everybody else said, that that they brought it from China and that everybody that was Asian was infected.
And Cecilia, can you add what we discussed for question 2?
Yeah, what was question 2 again?
How do you think racism has not affected the impact of COVID-19?
Right. We were also talking about how the virus has affected people of color, especially because we're essential workers and because we don't have the jobs that like privileged people have, that they can like stay home and not get infected.
Diego, do you want to add to that? You talked about East San Jose.
So I kind of gave the example of how the difference between like East San Jose and West San Jose, and how in the East San Jose, it seemed like more people were still going out and working, and it didn't seem like so many people were in quarantine, and especially like roads, and there was still a lot of traffic, compared to West San Jose, where it was completely empty and everyone had the privilege to be working at home or be safe in their home. and that really coming down to how like minorities are kind of like socialized and into different like job like into different fields of work and just different areas of living.
And you brought up, Diego, healthcare as well. So we talked about chronic illnesses that are a result of substandard housing. We talked about redlining, etc. I think we should give we will take more time if we talk about 3. So let's continue.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. Breakout room 5 with peer mentor Anahi.
For us, we talked about like how different, I guess, our interactions with like Asian folks have been. Like for myself, I told the group that I went to schools primarily with Asian folks, but I grew up in a Black and Latino neighborhood. So for 8 hours out of the day, I was with my Asian friends, but for the rest of the day, I was with my Black and Latino friends. And so I've kind of had mixed feelings because I kind of play a role in those 3 communities, or I'm involved in those 3 communities. So my perspective is really different. We also kind of talked about how I think we get into sometimes like this petty battle of like who's had it worse, and like COVID-19 has like super boosted that because now it's easier to target somebody because you have a reason for it. Whereas, you know, before you had to like really be mainstream racist to like do all the crazy things that are happening right now. So COVID-19 has like, you know, given it a boost. And also we talked about like how, you know, every race has their bad apples. Like, you know, we're all trying to fight for a cause, and unfortunately, some of us don't help for that. And you know, that happens with the Latino community, that happens with the African American community, that happens with the Asian community. You know, I was telling them that I've seen clips in the media where old Asian folks, like here in California or in San Francisco, they collect cans, they collect plastic to sell. And a lot of the times, African Americans have gone and have, you know, beat up those older people because of the fear of COVID-19, or, you know, just because shady things are going around. And you know, it's a crazy thing, because I also think that you can ask for help and go and do something shady. But I understand that that's not everybody, because I also see that in my own community.
Thank you, Santos.
Okay, next breakout room would be breakout room 6 with peer mentors Daisy and Sinclair.
Okay, so we thought, or at least me specifically, I thought that the whole effect of COVID brought like a new awareness towards supporting small businesses of like minority communities, which acted kind of to counteract the effects of systemic oppression. So that's what I thought.
Thank you. And then our last breakout room was with peer mentor Frida.
Okay, so for our group, for the first question, a few of the stereotypes that we have heard about Asian Americans are that they're bad drivers, there's a lot of pressure on them to like be smart, and that a few of them are rude. And then for the second question, we said that COVID-19 has greatly affected Asians because some people are calling them the cause of COVID-19, and they're saying that it's the Chinese virus. And then that COVID-19 has also affected not only Asian Americans, but also like racial minorities as a whole, because of how a lot of people are low income and they don't get as much support in hospitals. And for the third one, we've talked about how there's a lot of protests in certain neighborhoods and then not as many in others.
Thank you, Gloria. And then Dr. Rousseau-Hahn, did you want to go ahead and thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to add that in our small group, and I wondered if this came up in other groups, we also remembered Dr. Young's lecture on Tuesday, where she talked about social stratification and racialization, right? The history of racialization in our country, and really highlighted at the end racial triangulation. It was this tool that, you know, I hope that we continue to discuss, where she was highlighting that there's this dichotomy in this country of inferior and superior, superior and inferior, right? Superior being white folks, inferior being Black folks. But then she added in this graph the Asian Americans in the middle, and then this layer of racialization around being insider or outsider, foreigner or born in the US, and how that's an additional way in which people get racialized, right? And I think we've seen that thread today a lot for us to, you know, learning from Dr. Mary Yee, learning about that racialization process around foreignness, right? So this assumption that even when Asian folks who are so diverse, there's such diversity ethnically, et cetera, are always perpetually seen as foreigners and scapegoated across history, and we see it happening today. I wonder, Dr. Yi, if you could talk to us in the last few minutes. We're going to go maybe 2 or 3 minutes into 11, but I wondered if you could help us, because I think we didn't all get to question 3, and I wondered if you could help us think a little bit more about that anti-Black racism within our communities, within Asian American communities, within our communities, and helping us see that, because I think what Santos brought up with this, like, who has it worse, right? I think it's important for us to be thinking complexly around racialization and racism. And I know, Dr. Yi, you're brilliant. So I wanted to see if you could help us with some closing around that as well.
Well, I'll try my best. I think that one of the things we don't want to fall into is this trap of this competition of who's most oppressed. Because one thing that often happens, we forget about our Native American sisters and brothers. And really, they've had it, you know, they really experienced genocide.
And we began with that, Mary. We began the week really understanding that we're in Ohlone land and really centering Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous lives. So thank you for bringing that up as well.
So in the Asian American community, as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's a large dichotomy between, say, the one end of the socioeconomic spectrum and the other. And so I think that you might understand too that, you know, where you stand in terms of social status and wealth also determines a lot of your consciousness in general, right? And so that's what's happened in the Asian American community. And because of the waves of immigration, different classes of people came at different times. So for instance, for my family, folks were peasants, basically, and workers, all right? And that was until 1943 when the Chinese Exclusion Act was lifted. And then later on, not until the early 50s when, you know, citizenship for all Asians was finally allowed. But then in, okay, so then, the other thing that happened that was important in terms of immigration was in the 60s, one of the Kennedys introduced an Immigration Act, and it was to counter basically the Cold War propaganda of Russia. It was supposed to make America seem like it was, you know, had open arms and welcoming immigrants and so on. But what happened was that the administration thought hardly anybody would take advantage of this bill, but actually a lot of Asians took advantage of this bill and started coming over, and they were more lower middle class and, you know, were maybe white collar workers and so on. And then as time went on, because of family reunification and also because of the push to give visas to people who were professionals, okay, we had a lot of professional class people coming. So when I went to college, most of my Asian classmates were from, you know, working class families or families that had small businesses. But nowadays, when you go and sit in on a class with a lot of Asian Americans, you find their fathers and mothers often came here to go to grad school, or they're doctors or engineers, you know, or other folks that basically came already with privilege, and then when they got here, you know, still had privilege, right? And maybe gained some more privilege. So I guess I have to say that because different waves came and had different experiences and did not have interaction with other people of color a lot of times, except maybe in very fraught instances, like when we talk about, you know, LA and the riots in LA around Rodney King and then around Latasha Harlan's death, right? So you find that, for instance, my generation, we grew up with the Black Power movement. You know, we looked at the Panthers and folks, you know, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King as people that were our ideological and political leaders, right? And so our movement kind of followed along with what was happening with the Black Power movement. My father, who was in the military in World War II, you know, when it was segregated, basically had Black soldier friends. And he was telling me how he had no place to go on Thanksgiving. And so one of his Black friends invited him to DC to spend Thanksgiving with his family. So there have been different experiences with different generations and waves of immigration. So what I would say is that for the Asian Americans who are, say, the refugees from the Vietnam War, say Cambodians, Laos, Vietnamese, a lot of them live in Black neighborhoods or in very mixed neighborhoods. So they've gone to school, you know, with folks from different races and ethnicities. So their experience is different too. So like I said, with the young people that I was working with, they had Black friends, even though they were attacked by other Black students. And so they said, well, our Black friends offered to try to protect us, you know? So the thing is, you know, it really depends on people's personal experiences. That's why it's so important to really have people be able to meet each other, get to know each other. A lot of times in a facilitated situation, because, you know, people already come with stereotypes and so forth. But like summer programs, like I'm not sure what you call them out west, but sometimes, you know, they're governor's summer programs for high school kids. And so that's where a good number of the young people I worked with got to interact with Black and Latinx folks. And so when they came back to school, you know, they were able to interact with those folks in a more like equal and harmonious way without all of stereotypes, at least not so many stereotypes.
And Dr. Yin, this week we've been really talking about the importance of everyone in this program, all the scholars that are here today with us, all the students that are starting their career at St. Mary's as students, as transfer students and first year students, how important it is for us to not be competing with each other, but how important it is for us to be in solidarity with each other and understand that racism is affecting us all. We have to be fighting white supremacy, right? We have to be standing for each other, with each other. And I know that your last slide had some of that, right? Like that importance of, you know, understanding that your struggle is my struggle, right? So you have that. Yellow Apparel supports Black power. It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win, right? We ended yesterday's session with that. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose by our chains, right? That's a Shata Shakur. And so, Mary, yeah, tell us about this, like this final, you know, the struggle continues, but what's the thing that you want our students to take away with that?
Well, the middle photos, the one that says Yellow Apparel supports Black power, that's from the 70s. And the slide below that is Asian Americans marching against the Vietnam War. Okay, so right now maybe we don't see too many Asians doing protests on behalf of, say, Asian issues per se, but Asians have joined in the Black Lives Matter protests in different cities. Okay, and so I wanted to show that even in the 70s, there was resistance, there was solidarity with Black power, and it continues today. So on the left-hand side, you see Yellow Apparel again supports Black power and justice for George Floyd. And then all these issues relate to schools, not prisons, you know, the school to prison pipeline, issues with white supremacy or white insanity, some people call it too, and then education. So I also just wanted to end up saying that we all need to continue the struggle. In my own family, we try to do that. And so on the left, you see myself with my son and husband at a immigration rights rally. And then on the right-hand side, my grandchildren and my daughter who were at a Black Lives Matter protest. So I want to thank you all really for your invitation and for your, you know, great discussion around some of these issues. And I wish you the best of luck. And I really am grateful for the help of Jazzy and Dr. Rusoha in bringing me here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yi. I know students can send their messages to you if they have questions or gratitude, they can send that over the chat. We are going to connect them to you. So if they have questions further on, they can. And we're just so grateful, Dr. Yi. You are, I mean, I've learned so much from you. I learn from you every day. You're an incredible activist and scholar, and I learned so much. And I'm so grateful that you gave us your time and your brilliance today. And we hope to have you back sometimes across the year. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you all tomorrow, where we'll end our sessions on academic resiliency, and we'll be drawing on every session this week. Thank you so much, Dr. Yi.
Thank you.
Bye.
And please, Dr. Yi, see the chat, because students are writing you there before you log off. Bye, everyone. Have a good day. See you tomorrow.
All right, everyone. So going into our next session, it'll be like the other days, going into life and college skills. Again, we'll have peer mentors on the chat or on the Zoom call for all of you if you have any questions. I just hope that Dr. Yi's story and talk today really inspires you. Like, I know I'm just thinking about how much more that I can be doing in my own communities and in activism, and I hope that, like, I know that the HP community is a really great place to start. And so I think, yeah, just really build connections during this week and then throughout the school year, and really think about how we can be activists and anti-racist. So thank you.
Take care of one another. See you tomorrow.